Okay, Matrix LE 2x2 in Premiere Pro. So let's start with a very simple timeline. There are 4 tracks of video. Each track is the same length. And we'll go ahead and apply the Matrix LE 2x2 effect. So what we'll do is go to the Effects palette. If you don't have this, go to Window, choose Effects. You'll want to go into Video Effects, go down to dTective, and choose Matrix LE 2x2 and drag and drop it onto V4. Okay, and by default it shows one matrix window, so we'll have to go to the Effect Controls, which is up here. And again, if you don't have Effect Controls, go to Window and choose Effect Controls. And then Matrix is going to be below Motion and Opacity and Time Remapping. Here's Matrix LE 2x2. Let's scroll down to that. And we'll first talk about the inputs. So this is a little bit different than Avid. In this version in Premiere, you have to actually use these drop downs to select your video tracks. So right now, input 1 is V4 because we applied the effect to V4, but we can make input 1 video 1. We can make video 2 or input 2 video track 2, and so forth. And this is also how you rearrange. So in Avid, you would drag in here and swap these windows, but in Premiere, that doesn't happen. So the only way to swap and rearrange these windows and these videos is to use these drop downs. So if you wanted, say, input 1 to be video track 3, it doesn't swap. You have to actually choose to swap them manually. Okay, so that's a pretty big difference between Avid and Premiere. Let's put this back. But once you get used to it, once you get used to it, it's pretty straightforward and it's actually very intuitive. Okay, so moving down, you have columns and rows similar to Avid. So let's twirl these down. You can choose to have 1 column and 2 rows, or 1 column, 1 row, or 2 columns and 1 row, etc. So let's change this back to 2 and 2. Let's move down to margin and spacing. We'll twirl these down. So margin, that's going to be the outer edge here. So I can drag the slider over. I can also highlight this number and drag left or right. So you have 0 to 10. Right. Same with spacing. You can click and drag in here. That's going to be the spacing between the windows. So it kind of just resizes these windows. All right, put that back a little bit. The sampling, that's the algorithm used for the resizing of these windows. So you have these 3 options. The windows are so small that it's really hard to see what's actually happening here, but if you wanted to play with this, it's there. Okay, background options. By default, you can see it's grayscale. We can choose to have a color. There's a color picker here, this little box here. Click on that. This color picker pops up, and you can choose a color just by dragging. Do a red. You can also use the Eyedropper tool, and one thing here that's different, in Avid, if I use the Eyedropper tool, I can click and drag and choose anything from within this preview window. Let's make this a little bit bigger so you can see. In Premiere, it's different. So if I choose the Eyedropper tool, you're going to see that it's going to turn on just V4. So click on this, and now it's only showing me V4. So I can color pick from within V4. So that's different. So if you wanted to color pick from a different track, you can actually disable the preview of V4 and just turn on V3. That's not going to turn off the matrix settings. You're just previewing what's in video track 3. So now I can actually color pick from V3, choose this orange, go back, turn V4's visibility back on, and now my background is orange. So it's a little bit different than how Avid does it. A little more confusing, but that's how you would do it. So if I wanted to pick from V2, again, turn off V3, turn off V4, that little eyeball here, turn those off. Now I can pick from V2, choose this red, turn these back on, and my background is now red. So that's how you would pick from using the Eyedropper tool from different tracks of video. But you also have gradient options. So let's talk about gradient linear. When you choose that, you have a start color and an end color. This is exactly the same as it is in Avid. But again, your Eyedropper tool is a little bit different. The same thing happens, but the color pickers, click the little box and choose your colors. So that's very straightforward. We'll make this maybe a white. Okay. You also have size and angle. So size, that's going to be sort of the size of this gradient. So if I go all the way to 0, now it's just a line. If I increase that, you'll see that it becomes a little bit more of a subtle shift from color to color. And of course, angle, if you want this to be more of a diagonal, you could change this. You could actually highlight the number, type in 45 degrees. And now you can see, let's make this size smaller so you can really see. Okay. So there you go. And you can choose the wheel and just sort of turn it that way too if you want. All right. Okay, and then you have gradient radial. Same thing, you have your two colors, start and end. And then a size. There's no angle here, just size. So we'll choose a different size to really see. Okay. All right, that's the gradient option. You also have a composite option. And what composite does is looks at the track of video that's below the track that matrix is applied to. So it's going to look at V3 in this case. So you can actually have the background be video track 3, which is this track here. Okay, so that's kind of odd. So we'll put this back to like a radial gradient. Okay. Border and shadow. So let's do a border. Right now there is no border, but you can enable it. Default color is white. You can't really see it, so let's make it into a black. And we'll change the width of that border. Okay. Says your black border. Shadow is not enabled, but again, like the border, you can enable it. So turn it on. And let's change the opacity. So we can twirl this down, change this to like 100. And then we'll change the offset so you can really see it. So offset is the distance between, you know, the windows and their shadows. And the angle, that's a similar setting to what you saw in the gradient. You can click and drag, very similar. Or you can type in like 45 degrees. And then opacity we just covered. That's just the opacity of the shadow. And then softness, right now it's at 25, you can really make it soft. All right, we'll change the offset a little bit. Okay, so those are the settings from top to bottom. License is of course how you would unlock your software. If you want to save the effect, the way you do that is you go into your effect controls, right click on this matrix effect and choose save preset. So there is no save load. There's nothing like that like you have in Avid. In Avid there's a save and a load option. In Premiere it's just you save it. And we'll call this Matrix LE 2x2 preset test 2. This doesn't matter, just change scale's fine. Click OK. And then go up in your effects palette here, go all the way to the top. You'll see something that says presets. Open that folder, and that's where your matrix presets are being saved. Okay. And then you can apply them from there. So that's a little bit different than it is in Avid. Okay, so let's look at a more complex timeline. Let's twirl this back down and go back to our video effects dTective, and we'll look at a timeline that's got more unevenness. So this timeline, video track 4 is the longest, and then 3, 2, and 1 are all different lengths. So we'll apply matrix to V4 just to show how it handles these different links on the tracks below. So let's apply matrix to V4. And then we will go to the settings. Let's do V1, V2, V3, and V4. So this is important because it's quite different than Avid. In Premiere, if there's nothing here in these blank spaces, you don't have to add any filler. Premiere understands, okay, there's nothing there, don't show anything. So that's a little more intuitive and faster than it is in Avid. There's no need to add any filler material, there's no need to add any title material. There's nothing there, and Premiere understands that, and it shows nothing here. And as I go down the timeline, once it encounters some media, it fills in that particular box. But when there's nothing there, there's just nothing there. And that's what you'd want. And then once it hits a section of the timeline where there's media on all 4 tracks, then all 4 get filled in. So that's how it works when you have varying lengths below V4. But what if your timeline has varying lengths across the board? So let's look at that. So in this timeline, you can see that V4 is a different length, V3, these are all different lengths. So we need to apply matrix to Premiere's version of a filler track. And in Premiere, that's called an adjustment layer. So the way you do that, let me go into my project here, and let's add the adjustment layer. So the way you do that is there's a little new item icon here. Click on that and choose adjustment layer. And that's going to add an adjustment layer to my project. And it's going to ask me what size do I want it. This is the size of my current timeline, so it's 1920 by 1080, 2997 non-drop square pixels. That's all fine. That's the exact same settings my current timeline is in. Click OK, and it adds the adjustment layer. So now we need to add this adjustment layer, which is the same thing as filler in Avid, but we have to manually add it. So I want it in V5. There is no V5, so I'll click it and I'll drag it above V4 like that. And it's going to create a V5 video track. So there we go. Okay, so it's been added to V5. Let's drag this out so it covers the entire timeline. Like that. And now we can apply matrix to the adjustment layer. So we'll go back to my effects palette and I'll drag matrix to the V5 adjustment layer. And now we'll just go to the settings and choose what tracks we want. So we want input 1 to be video track 1, input 2 to be video track 2, input 3 video track 3, and input 4 video track 4. You can see that these are not filled in because there's nothing there, but as I go down the timeline, it'll start adding in as it encounters video on my timeline. And you can see at this point there's video on all 4 tracks, so it's filling those areas in, but in the areas where there's no video, it's just showing black. And that's on a timeline with varying lengths throughout V1 and V2, V3, and V4. All right, so that's how matrix works in Premiere Pro.